everyone, my name is Julia Caniglio, and today I will be presenting a persuasive speech arguing that combat roles should be closed to women because the cost associated with women in combat simply is not worth the ability to claim that we have achieved gender and opportunity equality in the armed forces. To this end, I will examine the heart of the controversy as expressed by the proponents and opponents of this policy, and then assess the legitimacy of each side's arguments. I will conclude my presentation by briefly addressing two counterarguments made by proponents of opening combat roles to women, and explain why their concerns should not cause policymakers to adopt this policy. The heart of the controversy is as follows. For proponents of opening combat roles to women, the key issue is creating equality of opportunity and of the sexes. They focus on the issue of equality in and of itself, maintaining that achieving equality is of the foremost importance. Conversely, opponents of this policy cite more tangible issues in formulating their arguments. They point to two things. First, that women are inherently physically weaker than men. They claim that this physical disparity between the two genders poses both short-term and long-term consequences for the women involved and for the effectivity of the armed forces as a whole. Second, they assert that women negatively impact men on a psychological level in combat scenarios. They claim that women will cause men to make poor combat decisions in the interest of protecting women, and that it will negatively impact the cohesion and effectivity of the armed forces. To reach a conclusion regarding your position in this debate, one should consider each side's arguments and evaluate the extent to which each side is able to substantiate their claims. Proponents of this policy claim that equality is the main issue at hand, but the question that must be asked is this: is achieving equality, both of opportunity and of the sexes, a valid reason to put women and combat effectiveness at risk? While the pursuit of equality is a noble and legitimate vocation, the cost must be considered. Is it really worth putting women in positions where they can be physically injured and assaulted just to say that we have achieved equality? If we decide that it is, after all, these women volunteering their service would be fully aware of the risk involved, we must determine if equality is worth the reduction of combat effectiveness. As noted by a Marine Corps study focusing on the impact of women in integrated units, all men groups outperformed the integrated groups in 93 out of the 134 tasks that were tested across all the MOSs. All male units were faster in moving to a target, especially with heavy weapons like machine guns. They also had more hits on target, and they hit their targets at a faster rate. Furthermore, there was a notable difference regarding the amount of time it took all male units to evacuate a wounded Marine versus integrated units, and women often had to have assistance climbing over a barrier with their packs. As previously stated, equality is a noble endeavor. However, we must decide if having gender equality is truly worth the impact it will have on our military's ability to defend us from outside threats. Additionally, we must decide if this is a necessary cost. Countries such as Israel and Russia have incorporated women into combat in the past, but they do so out of necessity, not out of a search for equality. Such nations only utilize female recruits because they do not have enough men to fulfill these roles, not because they want to achieve equality of opportunity and of the sexes. Furthermore, it should be noted that such nations place women in all-female units, or they place them in low-conflict regions in order to mitigate the risks associated with women in combat. Necessity, not philosophy, motivates these countries. If we are desperate to achieve equality, perhaps we should consider alternative methods, like modeling Israel's design, that would accomplish the same ends while mitigating the issues typically associated with permitting women in combat. However, to conduct a balanced analysis, one should also consider the claims made by opponents of opening combat roles to women. The first claim made by opponents is that women are inherently physically weaker than men. Data suggests that this is an accurate assertion, and that it should be considered because of the implications it holds for combat. Science and performance data suggest that there is a physical disparity between the capabilities of men and women. First, studies indicate that women do not have the same muscular capacity, skeletal structure, or VO2 rates as their male counterparts. The devil is in the data. As noted by the National Review, men exhibit higher VO2 max rates, a measure of the top's rate of oxygen consumption, bigger, denser bones, and create lean muscle much faster than their female counterparts. These differences may simply fill charts in the lab, but it makes a world of difference on the battlefield. These differences make it harder for women to perform essential combat-related tasks like transporting ammunition for extended amounts of time, evacuating fellow soldiers, and performing other types of grunt labor typically associated with combat roles. While it is true that some women can perform these tasks, it must be noted that these women are inherently more susceptible to injury than their male counterparts. The world of sports provides another cruel example of the irreconcilable divide between men and women. To display this, let's look at some statistics from last year's CrossFit Games. For context, the Games is a week-long fitness competition that tests various elements of someone's physical capabilities. By assessing an athlete's lifting, running, swimming, and gymnastics capabilities, the Games seeks to gain a holistic estimate of their fitness level. With that in mind, I would like to compare the winners of last year's Games. First, for the females, we have Tia-Clair Toomey. Her stats are as follows. She's 5'4", weighs 127 pounds, has a 330-pound back squat, a 392-pound deadlift, a 244-pound clean and jerk, 191-pound snatch, and she can do 50 max pull-ups. On the other hand is Matt Fraser, the 2017 winner of the male division. His stats are as follows. He's 5'7", weighs 190 pounds, has a 485-pound back squat, a 500-pound deadlift, a 375-pound clean and jerk, a 315-pound snatch, and 50 max pull-ups. Compared, there's anywhere from a 185 to 108-pound disparity between their respective lifts. Bearing in mind that these are both full-time athletes with similar training regimens, it's hard to believe that women are as physically capable as men, regardless of how much they train. For these two reasons, it's clear that women, even at their maximum capacity, are unable to rival men of equal fitness levels. The physical differences between their bodies simply do not allow for it. These physical differences make it unlikely that women will be able to withstand the physical toil of combat and substantially decrease the effectiveness of the fighting force as a whole. Thus, women are poor candidates for fulfilling combat roles. The second claim made by opponents of this policy is that women will negatively impact men on the battlefield. They cite that male soldiers tend to perform differently, or not as well, when women are embedded in their units. This concern is valid, considering the adverse effects that this has on mission effectivity. For example, a study conducted by the Israeli Defense Force stated that men tend to protect and assist women rather than continuing their attack. Furthermore, they asserted that unit morale took a decisive hit when men saw women killed or maimed on the battlefield. Not only does this innate instinct present challenges for unit morale, but it puts the unit itself at risk when men slow down or stay back to help a woman who's struggling to keep up. Regardless of the evidence that supports the opposition's position, proponents of this policy have two excellent counterarguments that should be considered. First, they raise a legitimate question. What does it matter if women are inherently weaker than men? Shouldn't the women who meet the requirements have the choice to enter combat, even if there is a chance they will be injured for life? Shouldn't that be their choice and not the politician's choice? Opponents raise an important point here. By asserting that only women who meet the requirements can be permitted to enter combat, they bypass the issue of the physical disparity between men and women. After all, the disparity is irrelevant if women have proven themselves capable of meeting the physical requirements. This is a valid assertion, and I happen to agree with them on this one. However, the issue at stake here is not really whether or not women can meet the requirements, but rather that meeting these requirements will negatively impact women over the long term. Since women are inherently weaker than men, the physical strain of combat will impact them more intensely than it will their male counterparts. Men who serve in combat roles often experience lifelong effects of service, such as joint and muscle issues. These issues would only be intensified by the inherent weaknesses of the female body, raising the possibility that an entire generation of women could be ruined because of their time in combat. Given that women contribute in so many ways to the business, academic, domestic, and security realms, it seems silly to let women ruin themselves. They have so much to contribute. Why not keep them healthy so they can give back to their country in other ways? The second issue proponents of this policy point out is the illogicalness of punishing women for men's inability to control themselves. After all, shouldn't we be getting on to the men for their lack of self-control instead of restricting opportunities for women? Like the first assertion, I can understand why this is a compelling argument. It seems unjust to punish and limit one group for the actions of another. However, while I might understand their argument, it's important to consider that this is ultimately for the purpose of protecting women, not punishing them. While opponents of this policy would agree that men should exercise self-control and treat women with respect, there are large swaths of men who simply don't. Putting women in combat greatly increases their chances of encountering these individuals and puts them at higher risk of assault and injury. In the words of Amanda Downs, a corporal in the Marine Corps from 2007 to 2011, stated, "If we can progress past the point where we are now in terms of sexual assault and gender discrimination, we can open positions. That's going to have to change before we try to integrate women into the infantry. Policy doesn't change hearts and minds, but this is an important change that must occur before we put women at risk." Women in combat would face enough danger by fighting enemy combatants. They shouldn't have to worry about those they fight alongside. Though proponents of this policy present valid counter-arguments, they commit two fallacies. First, they create an unsubstantiated appeal to emotion. Instead of looking at the facts and recognizing that allowing women to serve in combat is simply a bad idea, they attempt to appeal to every American's desire for equality. They ignore the facts and prioritize an ideal, which, unfortunately, will cause problems later down the road. Second, they commit a red herring fallacy by asserting that women are punished by men's lack of ability to control themselves. They bring up a valid issue, yes, but it casts a spotlight on who is responsible to effect change in hearts and minds, rather than the real issue at stake, the protection of women in combat. With this in mind, I wish to leave you with the following. First, proponents of opening combat roles to women raise many valid arguments, but the data suggests that including women in combat, simply to achieve equality, is not worth the cost it presents to combat effectiveness in women in the military. Lastly, rather than focusing on areas where women are not included, we should celebrate women's unique abilities and encourage them to serve in areas where they would thrive. Rather than working against biology, let's work with it to create a more effective fighting force. Thank you.